The phone rang at 3:17 a.m., and I knew before I answered that my life was about to change forever. The sound cut through the silence of my apartment like a scream, and when I saw the caller ID displaying my brother Marcus's name, my blood turned to ice. Marcus had been dead for 3 years. I sat there in my boxers, staring at the glowing screen, my hand trembling as I reached for the phone. The ringing seemed to echo off the walls of my sparse bedroom, each tone more insistent than the last. Outside, rain hammered against my windows with an almost violent intensity, and the street lamp below flickered like a dying candle. I could taste copper in my mouth, the metallic tang of pure fear. I answered on the 7th ring, my voice barely a whisper. "Hello." The line crackled with static, and for a moment I heard nothing but the hiss of dead air. Then came the voice, Marcus's voice, exactly as I remembered it, but wrong somehow, like an old recording played through water. "Danny," it said, and I felt every hair on my body stand up. "Danny, you have to listen to me. They're coming for you next." The connection was terrible, fading in and out like a radio signal from another dimension. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white, and I could feel sweat beading on my forehead despite the cold draft seeping through my windows. "Marcus, this isn't possible. You're dead. I was at your funeral." My words came out strangled, and I realized I was crying without knowing when the tears had started. The voice on the other end laughed, a sound I remembered from 1,000 childhood memories, but now it sent ice through my veins. "Death isn't what we thought it was, little brother. But right now, that doesn't matter. What matters is that you're in danger. The same people who killed me are coming for you tonight." I stood up abruptly, nearly dropping the phone, and stumbled to my window. The street below looked normal, empty, rain-slicked asphalt reflecting the few working streetlights. But something felt wrong, like the air itself was holding its breath. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, watching the call timer freeze at 2:43, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October wind. I tried calling back immediately, but the number went straight to a disconnected message. My fingers were shaking so badly I could barely navigate the phone's menu. I pulled up Marcus's contact info, the same number I'd kept in my phone for 3 years, unable to delete it. The same number that should have been disconnected when they found his body in that warehouse downtown. I remembered the detective's words, execution style, professional job. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Marcus had been investigating something big for his newspaper, something about corruption in the city's development projects. He'd been excited, said he was close to breaking the biggest story of his career. I dressed quickly, pulling on jeans and a sweater with movements that felt mechanical, like I was watching myself from outside my body. Every shadow in my apartment seemed to move independently, and I caught myself glancing over my shoulder at sounds that might not have been there. The rational part of my mind kept insisting this was impossible. Grief playing tricks, stress-induced hallucinations, anything but the truth. My gut was screaming. But Marcus had known things. Details about his investigation that were never made public. He'd mentioned names that night at dinner, 2 weeks before he died. Names that made him nervous, made him check his rearview mirror twice on the drive to the restaurant. I grabbed my car keys and headed for the door, but froze with my hand on the deadbolt. Through the peephole, the hallway looked wrong. The fluorescent lights that usually hummed their sickly tune were completely dark, and I could make out shapes that didn't belong, shadows that seemed too solid, too deliberate. I pressed my ear to the door and heard something that made my skin crawl. The soft whisper of fabric against fabric, like someone trying very hard to move silently. My neighbor Mrs. Chen always left her TV on at night, but tonight there was only silence from her apartment. The building felt empty, abandoned, like everyone had evacuated while I slept. I backed away from the door, my mind racing through possibilities. The fire escape, I could go out through my bedroom window, down the metal stairs to the alley. But as I crept toward the window, I saw them. 2 figures standing in the alley below, barely visible in the darkness between streetlights. They weren't moving, just standing there like sentinels, and something about their stillness was more terrifying than if they'd been pacing or obviously threatening. One of them lifted something to their mouth, a radio or phone, and though I couldn't hear the words, I saw the brief flash of light from the device. They knew I was here. They were coordinating. My phone buzzed with a text message and I nearly jumped out of my skin. The screen showed an unknown number, but the message made my blood freeze. We know you're watching. Come down and this ends quickly. Make us come up and it ends badly. I stared at the words until they blurred, then looked back down at the alley. Both figures were now looking directly up at my window, their faces invisible but their attention unmistakable. I realized I was silhouetted against my lit apartment, a perfect target. I quickly stepped back and killed the lights, plunging the room into darkness broken only by the glow of my phone and the occasional flicker of lightning. In the darkness, I tried to think like Marcus would have. He'd always been the investigative journalist, the one who dug deeper when I would have given up. What had he discovered that was worth killing for? I remembered him mentioning Alderman Morrison, the waterfront development deal, something about permits being fast-tracked for the wrong reasons. But that seemed so mundane, so bureaucratic. How could municipal corruption be worth multiple murders? Unless it wasn't just about money. Unless it was about something bigger, something that went deeper into the city's power structure than anyone realized. Another text arrived. Time's up. I looked out the window again, but the alley was empty. That was somehow worse than seeing them there. At least when I could see them, I knew where the threat was coming from. Now they could be anywhere. In the stairwell, picking the lock on my door, climbing the fire escape. I heard something that made my heart stop. The soft ding of the elevator arriving on my floor. The building was old, and that elevator was loud and cranky. It never ran quietly. But tonight, it had whispered up to the 4th floor like a ghost. I pressed myself against the wall beside my door, trying to become invisible, trying to think. The hallway had gone silent again, but it was the kind of silence that screams danger, the quiet of predators positioning themselves for attack. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, so loud I was sure it would give me away. Then I heard it, the soft scrape of metal against metal. Someone was picking my lock. The sound was almost musical, professional, the work of someone who'd done this many times before. I realized I was holding my breath and forced myself to exhale slowly, quietly. The lock clicked open. I had maybe 30 seconds before they pushed through the door. My mind went blank with panic for a moment, then snapped into hyper-clarity. The bathroom window, it was small, but I was lean, and it opened onto the building's interior courtyard. If I could get through it and drop to the lower roof of the adjacent building, I might have a chance. I crept toward the bathroom, each step feeling like it took an eternity. Behind me, I heard the soft whisper of my front door opening, followed by the barely audible sound of footsteps on my hardwood floor. I reached the bathroom and immediately began working on the window latch. It was painted shut, hadn't been opened in years, and my fingers were shaking so badly I could barely get a grip. Behind me, I heard voices, low, professional, efficient. Check the bedroom. Kitchen's clear. They were methodical, thorough, and getting closer. The window latch finally gave way with a soft pop that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. I pushed the window open and looked down into the courtyard. It was a 12-foot drop to the roof below, manageable if I hung from the sill first. I was halfway out the window when I heard them find the empty bedroom. He's not here. Check everywhere again. I pulled myself through the opening, feeling the cold rain immediately soak through my sweater. The windowsill was slick with moisture, and for a terrifying moment, my hands slipped. I caught myself, hanging by my fingertips 12 feet above the neighboring roof. My shoulder muscles screamed in protest, and rain ran into my eyes, making it hard to see where I was going to land. Below me, the roof looked solid enough, but in the darkness and rain, I couldn't be sure what I might land on. I let go. The drop felt like it lasted forever, and I hit the roof harder than expected, rolling to absorb the impact the way Marcus had taught me when we were kids jumping off garage roofs. The sound of my landing seemed impossibly loud, and I froze, listening for any indication that they'd heard me. Above, I could see the light from my bathroom window, and shadows moving back and forth. They'd found the open window. I had maybe a minute before they figured out where I'd gone. My ankle throbbed from the landing, but I could walk. I had to keep moving. The roof had access to an interior stairwell, a fire exit that led down to the building's basement level. I limped toward it as quickly as I could, constantly looking over my shoulder at the bathroom window above. Just as I reached the stairwell door, I heard something that chilled me to the bone. My phone, still in my apartment, ringing again. Marcus was calling back. The sound drifted down through the rain, muffled but unmistakable. I wanted desperately to hear what he had to say, but I couldn't go back. The stairwell door was unlocked, a fire code violation that I was grateful for tonight. The stairwell was pitch black and smelled of mildew and decades of cigarette smoke. I used my phone's flashlight, knowing the risk but unable to navigate the steep steps safely without it. Each step down felt like descending into a tomb, and the sound of my breathing echoed off the concrete walls. Behind me, the door at the top of the stairwell remained closed, but I could hear voices in the courtyard now. They'd figured out my escape route. Check the building next door. He couldn't have gone far with that fall. They were right. My ankle was getting worse, not better, and each step sent a spike of pain up my leg. I reached the basement level and found myself in a storage area filled with forgotten furniture and boxes covered in dust. The smell was overwhelming. Mustiness mixed with something else, something organic and unpleasant that made my stomach turn. I turned off my phone light and tried to orient myself in the darkness. There had to be another way out, maybe a door that led to the alley or street. I felt my way along the wall, my fingers encountering spider webs and something that felt disturbingly like fur. Behind me, I heard the stairwell door open and close softly. They'd found me. I crouched behind a stack of moldy boxes, trying to control my breathing while footsteps descended the stairwell. The flashlight beam appeared at the bottom of the stairs, cutting through the darkness like a sword. I could see the silhouette holding it, tall, lean, moving with the confidence of someone comfortable in dark places. The light swept methodically back and forth, and I realized it was only a matter of time before it found me. My ankle throbbed, my heart pounded, and somewhere in the building above, my phone was probably still ringing with calls from my dead beam. The beam stopped moving. In the silence, I heard a voice, not the searcher, but another voice, tinny and distant. A radio. Targets in the basement. Buildings surrounded. Take him alive if possible. The response was immediate. Copy that. Moving to secondary positions. I felt a surge of desperate energy. If the building was surrounded, my only chance was to move now, while they were still repositioning. I stood up slowly, my ankle screaming in protest, and looked for anything that could serve as a weapon or distraction. My hand closed around something cold and metal, a piece of old pipe. I threw the pipe as hard as I could toward the far corner of the basement. It crashed into a stack of metal shelving with a sound like thunder, and immediately the flashlight beam swung toward the noise. In that moment of distraction, I moved, not toward an exit because I realized there probably wasn't one, but toward the searcher. It was counterintuitive, probably suicidal, but it was the only direction they wouldn't expect. I launched myself forward in the darkness, my bad ankle giving way partially, but momentum carrying me toward the figure with the light. I collided with him harder than I expected, and we both went down in a tangle of limbs and equipment. The flashlight flew from his hand and skittered across the concrete floor, its beam spinning wild patterns on the walls before settling in a corner, still illuminating the space with harsh, chaotic light. He was stronger than me, trained, but I had desperation and the element of surprise. We fought in near silence, both of us professionals in our own way, him in violence, me in staying alive. I felt his hand reaching for something at his belt and knew I had seconds before this fight turned lethal. I grabbed for his weapon hand with both of mine, and we rolled across the grimy floor, each fighting for control. He was trying to bring a knife up toward my chest, and I was using every ounce of strength I had to keep the blade away from my body. In the chaotic light from the fallen flashlight, I could see his face for the first time, cold, professional, the face of someone who'd done this before. But there was something else there, something that looked almost like recognition. "You look just like him," he said through gritted teeth. "Just like Marcus." The mention of Marcus gave me a surge of strength I didn't know I had. I twisted hard and managed to slam his wrist against the concrete floor. The knife clattered away into the darkness, but he was already reaching for something else, a gun holstered at his ankle. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the fallen flashlight and brought it down hard against his temple. The impact sent a shock up my arm, and he went limp beneath me. For a moment, the basement was completely silent except for our ragged breathing, mine, and his, growing fainter. I rolled off him and grabbed his gun, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. He was unconscious but still breathing, blood trickling from the gash on his temple. I needed to get out of there before backup arrived, but first I had to know. I searched his pockets and found a wallet, a phone, and something that made my blood freeze. A photograph of Marcus and me at last year's family barbecue. On the back, someone has written names and addresses. My name, my address, and others, people I'd never heard of, but whose addresses were all local. We weren't the only targets. I took photos of everything with my phone. The list, his ID, his equipment. His real name was David Crenshaw, and according to his license, he lived in the suburbs with what looked like a normal life. But his phone was full of encrypted contacts and messages I couldn't read. What I could see were recent photos, surveillance shots of me leaving work, coming home, even shopping for groceries. They'd been watching me for weeks, maybe months. I pocketed his phone and checked the time. It was 4:23 a.m. I'd been running for just over an hour, but it felt like days. The basement had a utility door I hadn't noticed before, partially hidden behind a furnace. It led to a narrow tunnel that smelled of sewage and decay, probably connected to the building's old maintenance systems. I crawled through it on my hands and knees, my injured ankle throbbing with every movement, the stolen gun tucked into my waistband. The tunnel was barely wide enough for my shoulders, and claustrophobia clawed at my mind. But it was leading away from the building, away from whoever was waiting upstairs. After what felt like eternity, I saw a faint glimmer of light ahead. The tunnel emerged in the basement of a building 2 blocks away, an old laundromat that had been closed for years. I pushed open a grate and found myself among rusted washing machines and broken floor tiles. The smell was better here, just musty instead of toxic, and there were windows near the ceiling that showed the first hint of dawn. I climbed the stairs to street level and peered through grimy windows. The street looked normal, early morning quiet, but I knew better than to trust appearances now. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Marcus's number. I needed help, but I couldn't trust the police. If this conspiracy went as high as I suspected, they might be compromised too. Marcus had mentioned a contact once, someone he trusted implicitly. Sarah Chin, an FBI agent who'd helped him with previous investigations. I found her number in my phone's call history. Marcus had called her from my phone once when his battery died. It was 5:17 a.m., but this couldn't wait. When she answered, her voice was alert immediately, the voice of someone used to emergency calls. Sarah Chin. I took a deep breath and said words I never thought I'd speak. Agent Chin, this is Danny Hayes. Marcus Hayes was my brother. I think someone just tried to kill me. 3 hours later, I was sitting in a secure FBI office, telling my story to Agent Chin and 2 other federal investigators. The man I'd left in the basement was gone by the time they got there, but they'd found evidence, blood, the knife, and most importantly, surveillance equipment hidden throughout my apartment building. The conspiracy was bigger than Marcus had realized. The corruption investigation had uncovered a human trafficking ring that used city development projects as cover. Marcus hadn't just stumbled onto municipal fraud, he'd discovered something that threatened millions of dollars and dozens of lives. Agent Chin showed me photos from Marcus's investigation, documents he'd hidden in a safety deposit box, photos of shipping containers at the waterfront, records of falsified permits and inspection reports. Your brother was close, she said. Closer than we realized. We've been investigating this ring for 2 years, but we didn't have the municipal connections. Marcus found the missing piece. She paused, looking at me with something that might have been sympathy. The calls you received, we can't explain those. But someone wanted you to have information, wanted you to survive long enough to connect the dots. As I left the FBI building 6 hours later, my phone rang one final time. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, but this time I answered without hesitation. The line was clearer now, the static gone. "You did it, little brother," came his voice, warm and proud like I remembered from childhood. "You finished what I started. You kept the story alive." I looked around the busy street, people walking past in the afternoon sun, normal life continuing while my world had been turned upside down. "Marcus?" I said, but the line was already going quiet. In the background, I could hear something that made my eyes fill with tears, the sound of children laughing, playing in what sounded like a distant park. The line went dead, and this time I knew it was forever. I stood there for a long moment, watching people hurry past on their way to lunch meetings and shopping appointments, and realized that Marcus had saved my life in the most impossible way imaginable. Whether it was guilt, love, or something beyond my understanding, he'd reached across the divide between life and death to warn me, to give me the tools I needed to survive and expose the truth. The investigation that followed would bring down 14 city officials, expose a trafficking ring that had destroyed dozens of lives, and vindicate everything Marcus had died trying to prove. 6 months later, I visited Marcus's grave for the first time since the funeral. I brought a copy of the newspaper with the front page story about the trafficking ring's exposure, the headline reading, "Murdered Journalists Investigation Leads to Major Bust." I placed it on his headstone and told him about the families that had been reunited, the children who were now safe, the corrupt officials who would spend decades in prison. The afternoon was quiet, just the sound of wind through the cemetery trees and the distant hum of the city. I didn't expect any supernatural communication this time. Marcus had done what he came back to do. But as I turned to leave, I heard something that made me smile through the tears I hadn't realized were falling. From somewhere among the trees came the sound of laughter, warm, familiar, exactly like Marcus's laugh when we were kids and had just pulled off some elaborate prank on our parents. I looked around, but saw only empty pathways and weathered headstones. When I looked back at Marcus's grave, a single red maple leaf had landed on the newspaper, right over his byline. It was the middle of summer, and there were no maple trees anywhere in sight. I picked up the leaf and put it in my wallet, where I carry it still. Some mysteries, I've learned, are more beautiful when they remain unsolved.